welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast. Once again, my name is Matthew Quinn. I am your host, as always. And, of course, we're always brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We do have a great show on tap for you today. We'll be covering some of the NFL proposed rule changes that were going around the news headlines today. And we're also going to continue and actually finish our season outlook series. And we're going to be finishing up the NFC West with the 49ers and the Cardinals. And make sure you stick around for it later in the show when I will be giving two segments actually that are similar to each other. And first segment is 5 teams that made the playoffs last year that could potentially miss the playoffs this year. And then later I have 5 teams that that missed the playoffs that could potentially make the playoffs this year. So we're going to cover both of those, but before we start, I would just like to ask you guys, as always, to like and follow the show. If you want to contribute in any sort of tips and donations, of course, that is always appreciated. Or if you just want to leave a comment or a question, that's also great too. Your input is a big part of what makes this show great after all, so we do thrive on your energy and your insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion that you just have to share, don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure that your message stands out and gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. You can just hit the super chat feature. Just click on the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we do appreciate every single bit of your donations and all of your inputs and insights as well. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit that super chat button, and let's keep this show interactive and exciting. And if you prefer, you can also go to the GSMCsports.net website to tip, donate, and leave a question or a comment there. We couldn't do what we do without your amazing support. So we're so thankful, as always, to have you as part of our community. And once again, that link is gsmcpodcast.net. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the first bit of news today. We were talking about how different rule changes might be implemented this year. And a couple of them are ones that kind of make sense. One particular one doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but the first rule, there's 3 rules that were proposed. One was brought forth by the Green Bay Packers, and the other 2 were brought forth by the Detroit Lions, and they will vote on that in the owners' meetings in just a couple weeks. So first rule change that I wanted to talk about was the one that you've heard a lot last year, you've heard a lot before in the past, and that is the potential banning of the brotherly shove or the tush push or whatever you want to call it. That is up for a potential rule change. The Packers, as I said, were the ones who wanted to implement that. Basically, if you're unfamiliar with the play, it's essentially, a Philadelphia Eagles play. They basically have their offensive line and several guys behind Jalen Hurts help push the defensive line backwards and make for an effective quarterback sneak that usually ends up in a first down or a touchdown if they're on the goal line. The whole issue for me is I don't think that this play should be banned because, first of all, this isn't a play that is exclusive to one team. It's not like one team is only allowed to run it and nobody else can try it. I mean, we even saw the Buffalo Bills last year try it out a little bit in some of their playoff games with Josh Allen. And obviously not as effective as the Eagles, but the thing that you have to understand about that is that the Philadelphia Eagles are very good at that because they practice that all the time. And they've practiced it and perfected it, and it is the best, in the league in terms of that particular play. But my issue is that it just seems like a rule that wants to be changed because there is a team, particularly the Packers in this case, who has a hard time stopping it. And it is a very hard play to stop. But that's kind of also because of how it's designed and how it's drawn up, and also the, great offensive line that Philadelphia has, as well as the guys that are pushing Jalen Hurts. They've got Saquon Barkley back there, who's, one of the, strongest running backs in the game. Now they've got A.J. Dillon, who is also, a really, really good, or really strong running back, so that's kind of the issue with, really it's the Packers, but I'm sure there's a lot of other teams out there that want to get it banned as well. I'm not of that mindset. I think it's kind of a ridiculous thing to want to ban just because you can't stop it. Doesn't mean that it should be illegal. It just means that you need to come up with a play of your own to try and defend it as best as you can. And it doesn't seem like the Packers have been able to do that, and it seems like that's why they want the play banned. And, we'll see if they end up doing it. I personally don't think that they will. I think it's going to be one of those rules that's going to be, kind of thrown out in a way, just because it's just kind of a ridiculous rule to begin with. Banning a play like that, it's essentially a quarterback sneak, and you're essentially wanting to ban a quarterback sneak because you can't stop, the play. You can't stop the offensive line, so I just think that's a little bit of a ridiculous rule change. And I don't think it will get a majority rule. I think they'll throw that out, like I said. But the other rules, a couple of other rules that were implemented, I think make a little bit more sense. And first of which is the Detroit Lions pulled forth this rule. And it is essentially, you see a lot of these in recent years, or at least in years past, we've seen teams that have only won 9, sometimes even 8 games back when it was a 16-game season, and they go and they host a playoff game because they won their division, because their division just so happens to be, not that great that year. We saw it a few years ago back in the Drew Brees, Marshawn Lynch, Beastquake era. People forget, they always remember that game because of the Beastquake run, the very legendary run from Marshawn Lynch. But people tend to forget that that was one of those games that had a host team in the playoffs, had a sub-500 record, and they were playing the New Orleans Saints, who I forget what their record was, but obviously it was better than Seattle's, with Drew Brees. And then the Seahawks were able to use that home field advantage and, win that game. So that's just one recent example. And then you can take a look at last year when you had the 14-win Minnesota Vikings having to go on the road in their first week of the playoffs. Not what you would expect if you get 14 wins out of a year, but they didn't win their division, and their division just so happens to be one of the hardest, if not the hardest in the league. Certainly will be this year, I believe, with every team seemingly getting better, including the Bears. The Bears, could be one of those teams that, sneak into the playoffs and leave one of the good teams out of it. But, so I can see both sides of it, honestly. I don't really fall on really either side, because I understand the case of, you win your division, you should be rewarded for that. I get that. You want to win your division. That's usually the initial goal of a season, further than, a Super Bowl. First of all, you always want to win your division, because that'll help you in the long run. And, in this case, would get you a home playoff game. And I can understand the argument of, if you take that away, it almost makes the division winners sort of irrelevant as to who won the division and, all of that, because you're just going based on every team in that conference's record. But, on the other hand, I can understand the argument, for the rule change, just because, it is a little, sometimes it's a little off-putting, depending on the team. Because a prime culprit of this whole topic is the NFC South, because they seemingly always have one of those divisions, and the AFC South is similar to this too, not maybe so much in recent years with Houston starting to get better, but typically both South teams in each conference, they tend to have a lot of teams, or basically all the teams in the division are not necessarily what you would call contenders, to put it lightly. And the NFC South has been a victim of this, or a culprit of this, many times, and last year was similar. They had a team who won the division, although it was the Bucs, and the Bucs, who arguably are a good team, they still ended up, having one of those situations too. So, I understand both sides of it, but, I'm not sure really what they'll decide to do ultimately. It is kind of up in the air, because like I said, there's strong arguments on both sides for it. You want to keep that division title meaning something, so I get that. And then, of course, you want to do just seeding, with best record gets the top seed and so on and so forth, because that does make a lot of sense too, because it almost seems like you're punishing teams for having a good season when it's the other way around, when you're doing the playoffs the way they're done now. So I can see that side of it, but don't know if they'll change it. I don't think they will. I think they'll probably have to bring this rule up a couple more times before they decide to change it. It's just one of those things, and it, puts more intrigue into divisional games as well. That's another thing, is if you take that away, the division rivalry games don't mean as much because, even if you win the division, it doesn't really matter. It just depends on what your record is overall as to where you're seated. So I could see that could be a little bit, awkward or a little frustrating if you're a fan of a team that's put in that situation. But either way, that's what I thought of that rule. There is one more other rule that they brought forth also from the Detroit Lions, and this kind of goes hand in hand with another rule that I wish that they would change, but they, who knows if they will or not. But this proposed rule change is if there is an illegal contact or defensive holding, if this rule is passed, then it would no longer mean an automatic first down. It would just be, yardage-wise, maybe a 5-yard, maybe they keep the 5-yard penalty since it wouldn't be an automatic first down. And I get that, I understand that rule, and I wouldn't mind if it was, implemented because, a lot of the issues that are in the NFL right now are referee related. There's a lot of, iffy calls, to say the least. And when you get an iffy call like that, say if you have an offense that is on 3rd and 20 or something like that, and then they try and just do a little dump off pass to get something out of nothing, or a little screen pass, and then a defender gets called for defensive holding on a play that's very soft and there was hardly any defensive holding or hardly any contact, and then it's an automatic first down just like that because a ref made a bad decision or a bad call, and it just completely flips the momentum of a drive. So I could totally see them implementing that rule. But the other rule that I was kind of thinking about when I heard this rule is not one that is being proposed to be changed, but it's just one that I wanted to address because I've always thought strongly that this rule should be changed, and that is the pass interference rule. Not that it should all be reviewed and all that stuff. We crossed that bridge several years ago when they had reviewable pass interference calls. But no, this one is in terms of the yardage. I personally think that a pass interference call should not be spot foul, not the spot of the foul, because any quarterback can throw up a duck or throw up a bomb, at a very, very crucial part of the game and get a soft pass interference call. And then it's not first down, from the previous spot, 15 yards or whatever. It's, you get the ball where the foul happened. And if you're on like the 30, on your own 30-yard line, and your quarterback, chucks up a bomb and gets you like close to the 10, if not inside the 10, but then there's that soft pass interference call and it's an incomplete pass, guess what? They still get the ball all the way down there. It's a game-changing penalty. It completely flips the field, and I feel like there are a lot of teams in the NFL that strategize around that, and they'll throw, a ball up in the air at an important part of the game or at the end of the game because they know there's a chance that they could get called or they could get a favorable call for pass interference, and then they'd be set up right there to score and change the game completely. I've always thought that pass interference should be a 15-yard penalty. That's it. 15-yard penalty, first down. That's the way it should be. It shouldn't be these spot fouls because it just completely flips the field and completely changes the momentum of the game as well. So those were just a few of the rules. Those were actually I believe those are the only 3 rules that they're going to be voting on. But kind of a mixed bag as far as my feelings on it. I'm completely against the banning of the tush-push, up in the air about the seating, and obviously I am all for the illegal contact defensive holding rule change. I hope they implement that one because that will make a difference, and that'll make it a little bit easier on defenders because the game is, catered so much to the offense that it's almost impossible to be a defender in this league anymore. So that would be a win for defenders, I think, if they go ahead and change that rule. But so that is it for the proposed NFL rule changes. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a quick break before we get into the rest of our show here. So just stick with us, and we'll be right back right after this break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, everyone. Thanks once again for joining me. Welcome back to the show. Before we go ahead and get into the rest of our show, just want to remind you guys that if you have any questions or any comments or anything like that, you can always hit up our super chat on GSMCsports.net, and you can type in your question or your comment, and we will get to it as soon as I see it on here. So once again, that's GSMCsports.net. If you have a super chat, a question, comment, anything like that, always appreciated. So let's go ahead and get into the rest of our show here. We're going to continue on. These are the last couple season outlooks that we've got for you guys. And we're going to be talking about the San Francisco 49ers as we finish up the NFC West and the NFL in general. We are finally going to be done with this series. It's been a long journey. It's been fun to talk about each and every one of the teams and, dive into all in depth of, things that they've done, things that they need to do. And, it'll be interesting to see what all these, teams turn out to be like, see if I'm hitting on any of the records, predictions that I'm putting out here. So going on to the San Francisco 49ers, taking a look at what they did last year, was not the greatest year for them. They had a lot of injuries that they had to deal with. They finished 6-11 overall. They were last in the NFC West, and of course, they were missing one of the key players that they were missing was Christian McCaffrey. He only ended up playing in 4 games. He came back. He was out for a good chunk of the year. Came back against Buffalo. Ended up getting hurt again against Buffalo, and then we didn't see him again after that. So, it's a tough, a tough pill to swallow if you're the 49ers losing a guy like that, because he makes a lot of what they do well on offense go. He's that good. He can catch out of the backfield. He's elusive. He's got great vision. Everybody knows how good Christian McCaffrey is. So, it's also always sad to see a guy like that not be able to come in and contribute to his team, especially how good of a player he is. So it was unfortunate. They also dealt with a big injury to Brandon Ayuk, and that hurt on multiple levels if you're a 49ers fan, because not only is Brandon Ayuk one of the best receivers in the league, and of course not having him is, not a good thing, obviously, but there was all this offseason talk, the previous offseason, of if Brandon Ayuk was even going to return, because he wanted a new deal from San Francisco. There was talk that he could get moved to either the Commanders. I know the Steelers were in on him for a while. But ultimately, he did end up, after a long period of negotiating and all that, he ended up going back to San Francisco and got his extension. And then the year he gets his extension, he gets the ACL injury and he's out for the year. So it hurts on a lot of different levels if you're a 49er fan. Also, Deebo Samuel was kind of in and out of the lineup as well. He had sort of a down year in, his standards. He's declined over the past couple of years in terms of, stats-wise. But I do think him moving on to Washington will be a good thing for him because it's a fresh start, and I think he'll do well with a fresh start and a dynamic offense that they have in Washington. Obviously, the 49ers still have one of the better tight ends in the league in George Kittle. He was still productive last year. He led the team in receiving. He led them in yards and touchdowns. Both had over 1,000 yards receiving, 8 touchdowns. He was very effective for the 49ers, as he always is. Another good bright spot for this offense, and there weren't a ton of bright spots for the 49ers overall, but having Jawan Jennings was a standout as well, because he made a lot of big plays after Brandon Ayuk went down. So that was good for him and good for the 49ers as well. He finished with just under 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns, so just 2 behind George Kittle, who led the team, as I said before. Also, just to continue all the injury talk, the 49ers were also without their draft pick, their first-round draft pick. I believe he was a first-rounder, but wide receiver Ricky Pearsall, who actually ended up missing 6 games because he got shot in the chest in the offseason. And the fact that he was able to even come back and, survive that, first of all, is, a miracle in itself. But, to be able to come back and play football and play 6 games, that's just a testament to how tough he is, and it was really good to see him back in the game, back on the field, and healthy and safe and all that. So good situation there, and he should be back next year, hopefully being more productive, with a more steady slate of games that he gets a chance to play in, as opposed to just the 6 that he played in last year. The defense, they're typically always good. They were decent last year. Fred Warner is still an absolute beast. He led the team in interceptions and in tackles. So he was, of course, one of the bright spots of that defense. But again, they had a lot of injuries on defense too. Hufanga, their safety, who is no longer with them, he's with Denver now. He was hurt a good chunk of last year as well. So, he's their starting safety, and that was a big loss when he was out. But overall, they were ranked 8th, in total yards allowed per game, 5th in passing yards allowed per game as well. So they were top 10 in just in terms of yardage, but they gave up a little bit more points than you would like. They gave up about 26 points per game, which was good for 27th in the league. So not where you want to be, especially when your offense is struggling a little bit with, injuries and all that mess that they had to deal with last year. In terms of what some of their needs are, they got a lot of different needs, They lost a lot of players in free agency, so they obviously want to rebuild a little bit. It seems like it's not necessarily a rebuild year for the 49ers, but they're bringing in a lot of new pieces just by necessity, from losing a lot of guys. But also another issue, I think, is, their biggest need, of course, is on defense, and it's defensive tackle. So they could probably address that in the NFL draft. But another position that you want to potentially look at is Trent Williams at the tackle position. Obviously, Trent Williams is a Hall of Famer. There's nobody denies how great of a tackle that he has been his entire career, but he is turning 37, so you need to start thinking about somebody who's going to be his replacement going forward. So he's obviously going to be the starter until he decides to retire. I believe he's earned that right, and he's still productive. He's still a very, very good tackle. So I think they need to get younger at that position, though, and maybe get a guy and have him learn behind arguably one of the best, if not, you could make the argument that he is the best tackle of all time, possibly. I mean, he's that good, that much of a lockdown offensive lineman. You don't see too much, consistent domination out of that position like you do with Trent Williams. And not to mention, he's intimidating on the field. He's a mammoth guy, massive human being, and he's very intimidating, and he's not afraid to, he's not afraid to, get in someone's face. We've seen it multiple times. And we've actually even seen sometimes some players will make business decisions if Trent Williams is angry, and they will just stay clear of him. We see him on some of the replays. It's just kind of funny because he's just an intimidating guy, big guy, great offensive tackle. So still need to find a replacement for him for whenever he decides to hang it up, though. And running back, I would also consider looking at in the draft, because there's a lot of good running backs that you don't necessarily have to draft in the first round to get a quality running back in this draft. We've went over that numerous times over the course of the past week or so. But the departure of Jordan Mason, their backup running back, who got a majority of the carries last year because of Christian McCaffrey's injury, he is now gone. He is in Minnesota. So they need a little bit of extra depth at that position. I could see them going in the draft maybe on day 2 or 3 to take a running back. Don't think they do it in the first round. It's not that pressing of a need because you're not going to draft a guy that's going to replace Christian McCaffrey this year. So, you're just going a guy that's going to spell him a little bit, so it takes a little bit of a load off of him, so he's not doing everything, especially coming off of those multiple injuries that he had last year. You want to lighten his load a little bit so you can keep him fresher and keep him more effective as the season goes on. So look at running back depth for the 49ers in the later rounds of the draft. I could also see them going corner because they do need some help at the corner position. There's a couple players still left in free agency. Asante Samuel Jr. is a guy. Another secondary player, Justin Simmons, who's played safety, can play corner as well. He's out there too. If they don't want to go that route and they want to just stick with the draft, maybe they draft a corner in the first round. Looking at Jahdae Barron possibly out of Texas, that could be an option if he's available when they pick. Or maybe they go edge rusher to pair with Nick Bosa. With Shamar Stewart out of Texas A&M. I could see him still being there when they pick in the first round. So maybe they go that route. Who knows? It'll depend on who's available when it's their turn to pick. But they do have a lot of needs. So we'll see if they end up, going that route. But the thing about the 49ers, in terms of their record and everything, I've kind of got like a mixed feeling on the 49ers because I believe that they have a lot of talent still on that team. I know they got a lot of guys that left during free agency or trades or, whatever the case, but there still are a lot of really good players on that team. And Brock Purdy, he's proven that he can be a solid quarterback. I mean, he led them to a Super Bowl a couple years ago, so he is a good quarterback. And, of course, they still have Brandon Ayuk if he comes back healthy. He's still a good player. And that kind of is what killed them last year, is just their injuries. If they can stay healthy, this is a playoff team, in my opinion. I truly believe that. With Christian McCaffrey, Brock Purdy, George Kittle, a solid offensive line, and Trent Williams still there, holding it down at that position. Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk, you get all those guys back healthy, I think the 49ers could sneak into the playoffs this year. And it's kind of their pattern. They take a year off of the playoffs because they have a ton of injuries, and then the next year they'll get to the NFC Championship game. And then the following year they'll miss the playoffs because of injuries. And then the next year they'll get to the NFC Championship game. There was a pattern of that over the past few years. Obviously, I think that pattern has been broken since then, but there was a pattern at a time where the 49ers were either missing the playoffs entirely or getting to the NFC Championship game. So it's just kind of a weird thing. But that just shows you kind of their luck with injuries. They've not had the best luck with injuries overall over the past few years. But when they are healthy, they are one of the best teams in the league. They have proven that over the course of the last few years. So as far as what I think their record might be this year, it's going to all, of course, depend on health. As we talked about with this whole season outlook for the most part, injuries were the biggest reason why they struggled as much as they did last year. So if they can just stay healthy and add a couple pieces, maybe a couple other players in free agency that they want to pick up for depth or, something like that, or maybe they go in the draft, pick up a couple of key playmakers in the draft, I could absolutely see them going back to the playoffs. Don't know if they'll get all the way to the NFC Championship game like that previous pattern that they were on was, but I definitely think that they could sneak in as a wild card team. The Rams will be their biggest competition. Seattle, I just don't really know what I'm getting out of Seattle. Arizona, on the other hand, that's another team that interests me a little bit because, and we'll talk about them later in our last season outlook, but they kind of interest me from what they've done so far in free agency. If they can add a couple more pieces, they could sneak into the playoffs, and this division could end up being very, very competitive at the end of the day if everybody stays healthy in the division, of course, and if we end up getting a similar output from Sam Darnold in Seattle that we got when he was in Minnesota last year. Who knows? This could be a very entertaining division to watch. But I have the 49ers finishing second in that division. I do think they sneak in as a wild card team, and I've got them going 10-7. That's what I have them going. This is all bearing, of course, on the fact that they stay healthy. That's going to be the biggest obstacle for them to try and overcome. So we'll see if they can do it. We'll of course return to this. Excuse me, if I can get the words out of my mouth. We'll return to this a little bit later, and see how close we were to this particular record. And of course, we'll check on it during the course of the season too, and see how it goes. But before we go ahead and get into our next segment, which is diving into some of the playoff teams from last year, and whether or not they're going to make it or not. Before we do that, we're going to take another quick break. But just stick with us. We will be right back at the right after this break for the second or third segment of our show.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Hey guys, welcome on back to the show. Before we go ahead and get into the next segment, I just want to give a quick shout out to my stepmother Jude for getting me this brand new flashy microphone. So I hope the audio is better on the show tonight. I know it's been kind of iffy in the past few segments or past few shows, but hopefully it's a lot better now than it has been. And shout out once again to Jude for helping me out with that. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part of our show. 5 possible new playoff teams in this upcoming season in 2025. Obviously, there was a lot of entertaining teams last year. I do think there were some teams that you would typically normally see in the playoffs that did not get a chance to make it, whether that be from a lot of injuries that they had to deal with or just, a little bit of disappointing seasons overall. But 5 teams that I think can make the playoffs in 2025. So the first of which I'm sure is not really much of a shock to anybody. I have the Chicago Bears as a team that can make the playoffs this year. They've made a lot of really, really good moves in this offseason. And even last offseason, they made a lot of good moves as well. It's just the team wasn't completely built, and they had a terrible coaching situation as well. And they have hopefully a much better coaching situation this year with Ben Johnson coming in as the offensive coordinator from Detroit, coming over from there and being their head coach and installing a whole new system. And that will only make Caleb Williams better with an offensive mind like that. They've added a lot through free agency. They've really done a good job in the trenches. They've completely revamped that offensive line. The defense has also had some improvements as well. Getting a guy like Grady Jarrett from the Falcons was a big get as well. So a lot of really good moves from the Bears, and I really like what they're doing. And I think this could actually be the year where Caleb Williams starts to show why he was drafted as high as he was. He was just in a really, really bad situation last year. Very, very bad head coach. Should have been fired probably a couple years before he actually ended up being fired. It took just an unreal, boneheaded decision against the Detroit Lions to finally make the Bears brass, go ahead and fire him, which was the best thing I think that could have happened to Caleb Williams, to be quite honest. Matt Eberflus was not the guy that was going to develop Caleb Williams into a star, let alone a starter in this league, but just a star quarterback at all. Ben Johnson has that ability. He can absolutely do that. He's got the offensive mind. He can put them in great positions. They can add a few more pieces in the draft as well and just completely finish that team and make them a competitor. Don't know if they'll contend with teams like the Eagles or something like that in the playoffs. We'll have to see. But, they're really building something in Chicago, and I think they really can take a huge step forward this coming season. Another team that I think who missed the playoffs last year that I think can make the playoffs, and that is the Atlanta Falcons. And that is kind of for a number of reasons. I like Michael Penix. I think they're going to be better offensively than they were last year under Kirk Cousins. I think Penix showed a lot of promise in the few games that he played towards the end of the year. And the other reason really is that division is always so up and down and so wishy-washy. Like the Bucs are probably, at least last year, they were the best team in that division, but they weren't that much better than the Falcons record-wise. I mean, the Falcons had to lead in that division for a good chunk of the year last year, and then just ended up falling off. And then the Buccaneers surged towards the end of the year behind, of course, Baker Mayfield having a tremendous year and 40-plus touchdown passes. But the Falcons, if they got better quarterback play last year consistently, they might have won that division. They probably would have won that division, and the Bucs might be on this list now instead of the Falcons. I just think the Falcons, of course they lost a couple guys like Grady Jarrett. We talked about him just a second ago when we were talking about the Bears, because the Bears are the ones who nabbed him. But, I still think that the Falcons can do enough to win that division, because that's what it's going to take to get into the playoffs in that division. I don't think that division gets two teams out of it into the playoffs. I think it's just one team, and I think the Falcons have a good chance of being one of those teams that makes it. The other team I kind of almost feel sort of cheating in a way, but the Bengals I have is a team that missed the playoffs last year that I think will make the playoffs this year. And maybe I'm not cheating because Joe Burrow was healthy all year, and so was Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, the three highest paid players on that team, as of a couple of days ago, with Higgins and Chase getting their bags, respectively. So, I think the Bengals can make it just because, they were incredible offensively last year, and they largely have the same offense returning, so their offense is going to be good. We know that. And their defense, the way I see it, is they can't possibly be worse than they were last year. They started to improve as the season went along, too. When we got closer to the end of the year, the defense was playing better. They still weren't a great defense by any stretch, but, they were getting better overall, and they had a couple of big wins, and it was very, very close as to whether or not they would have made it into the playoffs. Say if they win that Week 1 game where they inexplicably lost to the New England Patriots, when they lost that game, they win that game, they could end up being in the playoffs instead of on the outside looking in, but at the end of the day, they were. But that is still a very talented team on offense. They just need to shore up some defensive pieces, and I think the defense will be decent enough to where the offense can still work its magic and they can be more effective, but their key is they cannot start in a hole again. Because they start in like an 0-3 hole or 1-4 hole, like they have a habit of doing, then, who knows, heads could roll in terms of the head coach, Zach Taylor, because I know he's going to probably be a little bit on the hot seat this year if they have another start to the year that they had last year and that they've had several years under him. That seat's going to get warmer and warmer as the season goes along. And if they don't improve, then he could end up being out of there before the season is even over. And that could spell disaster for the Bengals overall, with not having a head coach, and just having to deal with the interim, whoever that might be. But I think their defense will be better and decent enough to where it can, offset some of those, games where the Bengals were scoring 38 points and still losing, to teams that don't necessarily even have great offenses. Like, look at the perfect example was last season when Pittsburgh came into Cincinnati and put up 44 points on them. And now if you told me that, and looking back at it now, the way the Steelers finished the season, it's almost like mind-boggling that they lost that game, that they gave up that many points to that offense. So that's just how bad their defense was last year. So they need to improve that. And I think if they do, they will absolutely be a playoff team. I don't know if they'll win the division because the Ravens are still the class of that division, I think. But they always give the Ravens, close games, so those games will be entertaining to watch, of course, like they were last year. Both games last year were very entertaining, very close games. And I think that's no different this year. But I think it's going to be a two-team race in that division between the Bengals and Ravens. Whether or not the Bengals win that division is a whole other story, but I do think they get in as a wild card next year. So moving on, two more teams that I've got on this list here. one of which we just talked about in the last segment, and that is the San Francisco 49ers. And that's kind of a lot of, what I said in the previous segment as to why I think they can make the playoffs, because they were beat to hell with injuries last year. And if they can just be healthy this year, I think that automatically right there makes them a better team, and it makes them a potential playoff team, because whenever they are healthy, typically, they're still very, very well coached under Kyle Shanahan. He hasn't lost a step. He's still a very good head coach. So if they're healthy, they can be a dangerous team in the NFC. And in that division in particular, that division I think is pretty up in the air. The Rams are probably the favorites. If you were to ask anyone right now, I'd say probably the Rams. But the 49ers should not be discounted as well, because they're going to get a lot of guys back healthy, and that team's going to be a lot better if they can stay healthy. Brandon Ayuk coming back from the knee injury, Christian McCaffrey hopefully able to stay healthy. Add some more pieces on depth in a running back, or maybe even another receiver or so, just for depth. You still got Ricky Pearsall as well. So, I really like, the 49ers. I think that they can come back and have a little bit of a bounce back year, probably like a 10-7 record, like I said in the previous segment, and maybe a wild card exit, or maybe they win a game in the playoffs. That's possible. I mean, they've got the pedigree to do it. All those guys have been there before, so who knows? But the 49ers will be an interesting team to watch if they can stay healthy. That is, again, the biggest issue with the 49ers. Another team, maybe not a lot of people were, talking about as far as potentially being a playoff team, but I actually have the Colts down as a team that missed the playoffs last year that I think could potentially make the playoffs. And that's for a number of reasons. You may laugh whenever I say, Daniel Jones, because he's, not had a good history in his career so far, but I think he's another one of those cases where a fresh start would do him a lot of good. And even if he doesn't do, if he doesn't play or doesn't start or anything, I think the Colts just signing him should light a fire under Anthony Richardson. And as far as, he is concerned, it's do or die this year, I think, if you're a Colts ownership. If he doesn't show that he can be a franchise quarterback, I cannot imagine that they will keep on to him. I feel like they will move on from him after this coming season if they don't see any kind of improvement, or especially if Daniel Jones wins that job instead of Anthony Richardson. Because Anthony Richardson, he's got all of the athletic talent in the world. He just needs to be better at, reading defenses and being less careless with the ball. If he can do that, maybe he can grow into a decent or average starter in this league. I don't think he's going to turn into Patrick Mahomes or, prime Cam Newton or anything like that. But, he could be a decent starter in this league if he can just grow a little bit, as an NFL player overall. But the Colts, the other reason why I kind of thought the Colts here for a team that missed the playoffs that could make it is the division. It kind of goes sort of hand in hand with what I was talking about with the Falcons. The AFC South is not a division that you would look at and think, a Super Bowl winner's coming out of this division. You could have probably tried to make that argument last offseason when Houston were getting a lot of hype. But Houston, I think, this past year proved that they weren't necessarily – I feel like they were a little overrated. Not that they were a bad team or anything like that, but I feel like people expected – way too much out of them way too soon, because they came on the scene and, nobody expected them to be, electric like they were on offense in that first year. But I feel like a lot of people sort of caught on to that, and they weren't as surprised by the Texans coming into this past year. And the offense just looked flat most of the year. And they looked better in that playoff win against the Chargers, but ultimately, overall, if you take a look at their full body of work from last year, I don't think they were that great overall. They just happened to win a division that just wasn't very good, a division that has the Titans and the Jags, who typically always pick towards the top of the draft. And then you've got the Colts, who are typically always like a fringe playoff team, if that. They're always like right there on the outside looking in, maybe get eliminated on the final day of the regular season. That's the kind of team the Colts typically are. But I think they could potentially sneak in if the Texans falter, if they continue to show cracks in that offense, because they haven't done really a whole lot to address some offensive holes. I mean, obviously, Tank Dell, we don't know if he's going to, he's probably not going to play next year because he had that really bad injury right at the end of the year last year. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's out for the entire season this year. So they're going to have to, rely on Nico Collins, and they're not going to have Stephon Diggs anymore because he's a free agent. So, there's a lot of questions with the Texans as well. And them, of course, trading away their best offensive lineman and Laramie Tunsil, that's not going to help matters either. I think the Texans take another step back this year, and I think maybe the Colts can steal that division in a not very good division overall. So that's kind of why I have the Colts here as a team that can make the playoffs that missed it last season. So, so those are my 5 teams: the Bears, Falcons, the Bengals, the 49ers, and the Colts. All teams that I think can absolutely make the playoffs next year. Not saying they will, but they can definitely make the playoffs next year. So it'll be exciting to see, if they're able to do that. So especially the Bears. I am rooting for the Bears. I hope that they, have a decent season because, their fans are due, for a good year. They've suffered for quite a while. And I've always had a little bit of a soft spot in my heart for the Bears because I'm also a Chicago Bulls fan. So obviously Bears and Bulls, same city and all that stuff. So moving on to our next segment. Before we do that, we're going to take another quick break, and we're going to finish off our season outlook series, and we're going to be talking about the Arizona Cardinals, who I think are a very intriguing team to watch this coming season. So just stick with us, and we'll be right back right after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right, welcome on back to the next segment of our show. We're going to be finishing off our long season outlook series. I know it's been a long road to get here, but we have finally arrived to the NFC West, and that is the Arizona Cardinals. That's who we're going to be talking about to finish it off. And a lot of things, obviously, that they've got going on for them this year. And, excuse me, sorry, I just need to pull that up. Oh, I just typed in San Francisco 49ers twice. So let me change that real quick while we're talking. But the Arizona Cardinals, obviously last year, they finished 8-9 overall on the season, and they missed the playoffs, ended up 3rd in the NFC West. So a lot of work to do, of course, there. There we go. We got the Arizona Cardinals up there now. Sorry about that little mix-up, but, live show, you got to kind of roll with the punches, like I said. So anyway, moving on. We've got the Arizona Cardinals. Like I said, they finished 8-9, 3rd in the NFC West. Offense was a bit of a mixed bag. They were kind of up and down on just about every category offensively. They had games where they had, showed a lot of potential. They had a good young rookie wide receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. And Kyler Murray, of course, he's one of those guys that can really show flashes of being a very, very good quarterback. But then sometimes he leaves a little bit to be desired as well. But overall, he did have solid numbers. He had just under 4,000 yards passing, 3,851 yards passing, also added 572 yards rushing as well. And he had 26 total touchdowns, 5 of which were by running the ball. And he also had 11 interceptions on his stat total. So he was decent overall, effective, and, I still think he's a quality quarterback. A lot of people give him crap for being a shorter quarterback, but there have been plenty of short quarterbacks that have had success in this league before. Russell Wilson's one of them. Doug Flutie's one of them. For you younger generation, you probably don't know who that is, but Doug Flutie, a former Bills and Chargers quarterback, and Patriots, I believe, too. But, so short quarterbacks have had, luck in this league before. But Kyler Murray, I've always thought is a pretty solid, quarterback, probably a pretty underrated quarterback, I think, very underappreciated. And so is his running back, James Conner. I think James Conner is one of the more underappreciated running backs in the league. Saquon and Derrick Henry and all those guys get all the headlines, but James Conner is a workhorse. And, it's not really a surprise. The guy has a background of being a tough guy and working hard. I mean, the guy, battled cancer, beat cancer, was able to come back and play. He had cancer when he was at Pitt and came back, played for them, ended up getting drafted by the Steelers, was solid for them, ended up getting his play in Pittsburgh, got him a nice contract in Arizona. So obviously that is a good thing for Arizona to keep him and everything. So Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, led the team in touchdown catches, but he was just shy of 1,000 yards in his rookie season receiving the ball in terms of yardage. So he's expected to probably be your main wide receiver one this coming season. They didn't really have a ton of help, wide receiver-wise. They have guys like Zay Jones, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch. Those are guys that are on the offense, in the wide receiver room. So they need somebody else to take some of the pressure off of Marvin Harrison Jr. because obviously they don't have Hollywood Brown anymore as he ended up going to the Chiefs last offseason. So they've got to find a way to build around Marvin Harrison Jr. because he has the potential to be a very, very good wide receiver, so we'll see if he ends up, if they end up getting some help for him and maybe he can boost his numbers, get over 1,000 yards this particular season. The defense, on the other hand, they were a little bit of a liability at times. They were 21st in total yards allowed per game, 20th in rushing yards allowed also. And they were pretty much middle of the road in just about every other category. So defense needs some work. They've already done a pretty good job in free agency trying to add some guys to that defensive front. Josh Sweat from Philly, they made that move early on in the free agency period. So that was a big move from them there. They need at least probably one more offensive lineman to really make that line solid, which, is good because Connor's already a very good running back. So making that offensive line even better is only going to help him. And, possibly as long as he can stay healthy, because I know he got dinged up a couple times last year and he's had a history of being a little bit injured, not like majorly, but being a little banged up from time to time. At least that's the way he was in Pittsburgh anyway. And one of the reasons why Pittsburgh opted to move on from him. But he's been relatively healthy in Arizona. So if he can keep that up, maybe they can, that offensive line can get him one of those, crazy good years that, I feel like he deserves because he's a hard worker and he is a solid running back. And it would be nice to see him just go off one year, but maybe in the draft, as far as some of the needs, we talk about that they need a wide receiver, another wide receiver to join Marvin Harrison Jr. And I was thinking about this earlier, and why not add Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver from Ohio State, who is Marvin Harrison Jr.'s former college teammate? Why not add him and pair the two of those guys up again, and maybe they can end up having a pretty solid year together. So it's possible. I could absolutely see that happening, because they need wide receiver help. Egbuka would probably have to go in the first round, though. I don't expect him to be available round 2, but we'll see. I think that he could absolutely be a good quality receiver for them. Or maybe if they don't want to go receiver in the early parts of the draft, maybe they want to sign a veteran. Maybe they sign Amari Cooper or Stephon Diggs possibly. I know he's been making some visits across the league over the past couple of days or so. I don't know whether or not he's going to get signed. He's probably not going to get re-signed by Houston, most likely. You figure they probably would have already re-signed him if they were going to. So, we'll see what happens with him. Maybe he visits the Packers too. I think I heard somewhere that he was going to visit the Packers, or maybe that was a different team I was thinking of. I don't know. But the Cardinals, could potentially try and snatch him up because I think that would be a solid veteran to pair with Marvin Harrison Jr. The only thing with Stephon Diggs is he's kind of had a history of not necessarily being the best teammate when he's not getting the targets that he wants. So that could be an issue, especially with a young wide receiver. That would be the only reason for me to kind of, be hesitant to make that move. I'd probably lean more towards Amari Cooper just because he's a better overall leader in that locker room, better veteran leader. He doesn't really complain too much. You don't hear anything from him, really. He just kind of does his job, and he's a solid receiver. He's a little older now, but I think he's a solid receiver overall. But we'll see if that's what they decide to do. But Arizona is another one of those teams, kind of similar to how I feel about the 49ers. The only difference is, the injuries are not really an issue with Arizona. They didn't face that many injuries last year like the 49ers did. But they're one of these teams that's kind of up and coming that I think can possibly sneak into the playoffs. Who knows? It's going to, like I said in the previous segment, it's going to be a difficult division if everybody stays healthy, because everybody, I feel, has gotten better, except for maybe Seattle, because I feel like they made a lot of lateral moves as to what they had last year. So I don't think that they're necessarily better than they were last year. I think they're kind of right where they were last year. I don't see much movement for them. So maybe the Cardinals can overtake them. Because like I said, they added a couple of really good pieces so far in free agency and things like that. So if they can have a solid draft, who knows? Maybe they can sneak into the playoffs and be a team that ends up winning a game or two. Who knows? But it's a tough NFC trying to get through the Lions and, the Vikings and the Eagles, of course, the Eagles being the best team in the NFC last year. The Vikings, there's still question marks as far as what their quarterback situation is going to be like with J.J. McCarthy, because as touted as he has been, we still don't know. We've never seen him play in a real NFL game, and now he's coming off of a major knee injury, so we'll see how he responds to that. So question marks there. But the Cardinals, I think overall, as far as what my record prediction, they were 8-9 last year. I could see them probably going about 9-8, maybe 10-7, depending on how things shake out in the division. I think they are better than they were last year. Maybe they get to 10 wins, but I think 9-8 is a safe bet for them overall. And whether or not that sneaks them into the playoffs, we'll have to see. It depends on what the rest of the NFC does, of course. But that's where I have them going. And that is the last season outlook that we have. So we've gone through every one of our teams in the NFL. So if you've missed it, if you're a fan of an NFL team and you want to see one of these season outlooks, there's plenty of those options on our channel as well. So you can definitely check those out and see what I might have said about your favorite team and see if you want to argue with me if I said something bad about your favorite team. So sorry if I did, I can't really help it sometimes, but that's just the way it goes. But that is it for our season outlook. So I'll have to think of another topic to start talking about to control some time here. So before we go into our final segment of the day, and it's going to be a pretty interesting segment because I'm going to be looking at teams that were in the playoffs last year that I think will be on the outside looking in this year. So we'll get into that right after this break here. So stick with us and we'll be right back. right, guys, we are back for our final segment of the show, and we are going to be talking about 5 playoff teams from a year ago that will miss the playoffs this coming season. And obviously, the first team that I want to talk about is the team that I know you guys love hearing me talk about over and over on this show, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Yes, I think they will miss the playoffs this year. And I know, obviously, I'm wearing my Steelers shirt here for just that special occasion because I just want to dog out my team a little bit more. So as a Steeler fan, you tend to be their harshest critic, as opposed to all the people in the national media who love Mike Tomlin and want to see him be the head coach for the Steelers for decades to come. But that is not what most Steeler fans want. And going on to the Steelers, just why I think they will miss the playoffs is simply because they don't know what they're doing at quarterback. They're most likely going to probably roll with Mason Rudolph, which I agree with. I'd much rather have Mason Rudolph as the QB1 and then rather than having 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers. We've been over this. You guys know at this point my stance on Aaron Rodgers. Don't want him here. I don't care how, productive he might be. I don't care if he'll be a better quarterback than Russell Wilson. I do not want him here because if he wants to be a Steeler, he would have been a Steeler already. Make up your mind at this point. That's kind of where I'm at with Aaron Rodgers. But, I just think the Steelers have just not done enough in free agency. They've had a lot of cap space going into this. And, of course, they made the big move by getting DK Metcalf, which is great. I love that move if you have an idea of what you're going to do at quarterback. The Steelers do not have that. And they have not had that, and they have not had that plan ever since a couple years before Ben Roethlisberger was going to retire. That's when they should have started really looking into drafting his replacement. One of the biggest things that I always go back to is the 2020 draft when they decided to draft Chase Claypool, who, by the way, is no longer in the league anymore. They had a second-round pick. They drafted Chase Claypool, and they could have drafted Jalen Hurts that draft. But the reason they didn't is because Ben Roethlisberger was still on the staff, and he would have been annoyed if the Steelers drafted a quarterback because he would have felt threatened, even though they were never going to start, any quarterback over Ben Roethlisberger until he retired. They're just not going to do that to him. But, Ben kind of let his pride get in the way. He kind of was that way when they drafted Mason Rudolph several years ago. He didn't really like that, and that's why he didn't necessarily have a great relationship with Mason Rudolph, because he looked at him as a threat, even though he never really was. But lo and behold, Mason Rudolph could absolutely end up being the number one quarterback this year for the Steelers. And I just don't think that they're going to make the playoffs. I don't think there's enough there. The defense, I think, is as great as as far as individual performances that they have on that defense with guys like TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, Minka Fitzpatrick, Patrick Queen. All those guys are all pro dudes. But I just don't trust the coaching. Defensively, scheme-wise, schematically, I just don't like how they do. They keep TJ Watt on one side of the line. Don't even try and move him around when he's getting triple-teamed and chipped every single play. They just keep running the same type of defense, same zone defense that never works, and they keep running it out every single year. So I just don't trust the coaching, but I won't rant too much about the Steelers because there's 4 other teams on this list that I'm going to dog out a little bit too. So I just wanted to save that special segment for the Steelers there just to start everything off and get it all out in the open so you guys don't have to hear me talk about the Steelers and how bad I think they are this year. So moving on, I also think the Houston Texans will miss the playoffs this year. Kind of talked a little bit about that when we talked about the Colts a couple segments ago. I just think the Texans have let go of a lot of, or at least one main player that really I think is a head scratcher, and that's the Laramie Tunsil trade. Their offensive line was, iffy at best last year anyway, and he was the best part of that line. And then now they get rid of him, and now they're, now they have to fill a hole, with a guy that you don't know if you're going to draft him, you don't know if he's going to end up being as quality of a tackle as Tunsil is. You take that risk by getting rid of him, and you need as much offensive line help as you can possibly get. Now, maybe there was something going on behind the scenes that we don't know about as far as why they traded him, because they traded him for, essentially nothing. I think it was a 4th or 5th round pick they traded him for. That's nothing for a guy like Laramie Tunsil. He's a Pro Bowler. So I just don't get that. I don't get why they did that, but, that's another move. That's kind of a head scratcher. I know we've mentioned that before, but I think the Texans, they showed a lot last year on the negative side. I feel like they took a big step back last year from what they were when C.J. Stroud was a rookie and when, DeMeco Ryans was a rookie head coach. that first year when they were all together with Tank Dell, Nico Collins, none of those guys were hurt. They were all healthy. That was a solid team. Their offense was clicking. They were lightning in a bottle, basically. And then they ended up just being that, just lightning in a bottle, because they didn't sustain it in the next year. They got to the playoffs and got to the divisional round after they picked up a wild card win over the Chargers. But, I don't see them doing that again this year. I think they're going to take another step back, and maybe the Colts overtake them in that division. The division is not a great division, so whoever wins it, I don't think is going to have much more than 10 wins, if they even have 10 wins. It's just not a very good division overall. Like I said earlier, half of the teams in that division pick in the top 5 of the draft just about every year. So that's not a quality division. So it just kind of depends on how it all shakes out. But I have the Texans missing the playoffs next year. Moving on to the next team I have, and this might surprise some people, but I have the Chargers as a team that made it, that will probably, or at least has a possibility of missing it this coming season. I know that they picked up Najee Harris to help with their run game and everything, but I also think that division has gotten a lot better. The Broncos are getting better and better, and I feel like they're going to be challenging the Chiefs more so than the Chargers in terms of the division. The Chiefs have shown cracks over the years. I think that Super Bowl loss to the Philadelphia Eagles showed a lot of flaws of what this team has, and they need to improve in a lot of areas because they were just manhandled in that Super Bowl. And there were too many games last year where, given their pedigree and their record and all that, you would think that they should be able to easily take care of some of these teams. Like the Panthers took them all the way to the end, and the Panthers were, one of the teams that are picking in the top part of the draft because they were bad last year record-wise. They got a little better as the season went on after Bryce Young came back in after being benched. But, they took the Chiefs to the very end, and the Chiefs had a lot of other games that were just kind of iffy because they would win on a controversial call, or they would win just based on a field goal at the end of the game. They weren't sharp for most of the season, and it really, really reared its ugly head once they got to the Super Bowl and they played a team that was just flat out better than they were, and they just got absolutely out-physicaled. They got outplayed, outclassed in that Super Bowl, and I think that raised a lot of alarm bells in Chiefs Kingdom after that game. So, the Chargers, I think, can miss the playoffs next year just because that division, like I said, is getting better. Because not only, of course, the Chiefs will still be there, they'll still probably win the division, but like I said, the Broncos are going to be good next year, and even the Raiders are getting better. And I don't think 3 teams get out of the division to get into the playoffs next year. I don't think that's going to happen in a lot of teams, or I don't think that may not even happen at all. Maybe the NFC North gets 3 teams just because that division is very, very good. But I don't see any other division getting more than, or getting 3 teams in the division or in the playoffs from the division. So I think it's going to be the Chiefs and Broncos in that division in terms of who goes to the playoffs. So that leaves the Chargers on the outside looking in. I just think the Broncos have made better moves overall, and the Chargers, I can't have a hard time trusting the Chargers. I know they have Jim Harbaugh now, so it's, different, I guess. But they've had many of other different coaches that, are, usually good coaches. And, one of the big ones that comes to mind was way back in the day with Marty Schottenheimer. He won 14 games and they fired him in the offseason. So it's just, the Chargers are just one of those teams that are like, oh yeah, these guys have got a lot of talent, but they can never really get past, where they need to. They can never really get over the hump or really play to their true potential. And I think that's going to be another situation that we see this coming season. I got the Chargers out of the playoffs here. So moving on to the next one, and this next one is kind of division-based, because just because I have this team not making the playoffs next year does not mean that I think this team is a bad team or that they'll take a step back or anything like that. But I've got the Green Bay Packers missing the playoffs simply because somebody in that division has to miss the playoffs. They're not getting all 4 teams in that division. And I think the Vikings still have quality around J.J. McCarthy. I mean, we don't know what we're going to get out of him, but that team is loaded with talent. So he just needs to be decent, and they'll be in the playoffs, I think. The Lions, obviously, are still very good. They need to shore up their defense a little bit, but their offense is still very good. It will be interesting for the Lions to see them come out next year with 2 brand-new coordinators. We'll see if they can keep that offensive firepower. They've still got the players, so we'll see, because a lot of the schemes that the offense was running was a good reason why the Lions were as good as they were. So we'll see as far as that is concerned. But I have the Packers going, like I said, I mean, it's hard to even really say it, because I like some of the things that they've done in the offseason this year. Like getting Nate Hobbs from the Raiders, I think is a good move for their secondary. I just think that the Bears have made too many better moves, and I think the Bears are going to be that other team that gets into the playoffs in that division. It'll be the Lions, the Vikings, and the Bears. Maybe it'll be in different order. Maybe it'll be the Lions, Bears, Vikings. Who knows? That division was very good last year and had 2 14-win teams in it. So, who knows? It's a very, very good division. We'll see what happens with that. But the last team that I have on my list, last team of this show here, is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that is kind of covered a little bit in what I talked about with the Falcons a few segments ago. The Buccaneers, I think, are decent, but I think the Falcons will be better next year. I don't think the Panthers or Saints are going to be a threat. But I think the Falcons will be better, and this is another division that I don't think gets more than one team in it, in the playoffs. So the Falcons were, like I said, winning that division for most of the year last year before the Buccaneers turned it on and the Falcons faded, as they were struggling with Kirk Cousins before they ultimately moved to Michael Penix. But the Buccaneers, I feel like it's going to be one of those years that they're going to be scrappy, because they always are. As long as they have Baker Mayfield, they'll be scrappy, and their offense will be decent. But I think they'll miss the playoffs simply because I don't think more than one team gets into the playoffs from that division. Just the way I think it'll go. That's just kind of the way it always is with that division. It's always the division winner that makes the playoffs, and then everybody else misses the playoffs. That's just kind of the way it goes in that division. And I think it'll be another similar case with this coming season. So, so that is actually it. That's all for this show. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed going through all the season outlooks with you guys, and then, of course, diving into some of these playoff teams and all that. That was pretty interesting to get into that. So I appreciate you guys all listening. And, of course, we'll be back again with a show tomorrow. And hope you guys stay tuned for that as well. But again, thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast. We are all, of course, we are always presented by the GSMC Sports Network. See, you would think that I could get this right, even though I've got it written down right in front of me, but I still flub the lines. But anyway, your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on all the social medias. You guys all know them by now. Facebook, X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, TikTok, Instagram, for more content and updates. Thank you guys once again, and have a wonderful night, and I will see you tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to